So any great athlete, they'll tell you the champions are made from the neck up in many ways, from how your brain functions from a physiological standpoint to make sure it doesn't have inflammation in it, called neuroinflammation, and most people do in this world, but also your thought process that you have, your viewpoint about yourself, and the world that you live in. People experience that all the time, where I just tell them, have you ever been completely alone and kind of like some of the world is now, and you've thought about something that's been very stressful for you, or the stress that you're in, and can you feel this wave of physiology completely change in your body, and you didn't leave the room, and it happened in a split second, and then you can flip the switch and think of something that was very wonderful or joyous or a thrill in your life that could have happened decades prior, and then this blanket comes over you and you feel completely different. That was just based on the emotional context of your brain putting this scrapbook together, and then you painted a picture, a story for yourself. So you can change the story anytime. That's the most empowering part. And I see people in chronic pain, man. I mean, you don't see me first when you get hurt. You see me when you've been through a lot of stuff, and then what's supposed to help you never helped you, or it did and it stopped helping you, or it made you worse. Then you're usually open and receptive to the stuff that I'm going to be going over with you. And I'll usually never do what somebody else has already done for you, because if you needed that, you wouldn't have found me. You would have already been better, you know? So some of the context, honestly, in my world of rehab, I tried to bring more of a playful interaction with people and movements to this world of being so serious with what we're doing. And many people thought that I was like, yeah, what kind of doctor is this where you're just having me do these play games? But that was just more of the mental thing for them. And then once they started to do it and let this guard down, as we have as human beings, we're kind of wrapped in this hard shell. And they started to feel better and smile and laugh. And the beautiful thing that I've learned when you do playful movement is that you're not focusing on your pain. You're just focusing on the playful movement or the task at hand. Play usually has some underlying, it seems arbitrary, but it's not. Play is not arbitrary at all. It's usually very task-oriented driven. You're just not obsessed with the end goal of the task. You're just involved in the moment that you're in. That's what I like about it. You're in the moment that you're in, and you're not really thinking about what just happened and what's coming next. You just are. And that's a big component to healing.
Welcome to the Evolve, Move, Play podcast, where we bring you the most interesting and enlightening conversations around movement practice and how you can become the most heroic version of yourself through pursuing movement that's relevant to your nature. This is a podcast that's going to feature some of the top movers in the world, some of the most amazing movement thinkers, and people from fields that are related to movement as far afield as evolutionary theory, strength and conditioning, and everything in between. So if you're interested in movement, please stick around. And if you like our work and want to support it, please consider supporting us on Patreon, because this podcast is completely listener supported. We don't want to take any advertising. We don't want to interrupt your experience of watching the show. So what really helps us get the best thinkers on, have the time to put these together, have the best quality for you guys as far as audio and video, is your support. So please consider supporting us and enjoy the rest of the show.
Hey guys, welcome back to another episode of the Evolve, Move, Play podcast. This week, my guest is Perry Nickelston, the founder of Stop Chasing Pain. And I love that title, right? I've seen so many people get lost in this quest to kind of identify the very specific mechanical problems with their pain. And so often it just leads them to being stuck in chronic pain. So Perry is an incredible systems thinker. He's a doctor of chiropractic, but his work goes far beyond your usual crack your back type chiropractic. He's a former bodybuilder, an athlete who suffered some serious chronic pain issues that he then went out to try and find. And he started looking at the levels of the nervous system, looking at the level of the emotional system, looking at the level of the lymph. And there's a lot of interesting ideas about how these systems interrelate and how we can help human beings function much better, get them playing, get them moving, and create, better human beings. So I was really excited to talk to Perry, and this was my first time ever having a conversation with him, and it went very deep. It got quite emotional as we talked through some of the stuff that we've dealt with. So I think, that hopefully that will speak to a lot of you guys. We're going to break this up into 2 weeks because we ended up talking for substantially longer than we normally do on a podcast because there's just so much to share. So I think it's a really rich interview. You guys are going to enjoy it. A little bit of bookkeeping before we get to Perry, though. If you've been thinking about joining us for our online course but couldn't commit to it, we're now offering a weekly subscription rate so that you can take a look at it without making that big upfront commitment. I think this is going to really help people get involved in, with the situation that we currently have, where it's quite difficult to train in a lot of the traditional ways most people are used to. I think this is an amazing resource for you guys to get you out into nature. And I think this is actually one of the very safe things that you can do. We'll probably address that at another time, but being outside in the natural world is a relatively quite safe way to train. And I think that there's a good resource for you if you guys are interested in that. But that's all from me. So without further ado, Perry Nickelston.
Perry, welcome on the program. It's a real pleasure to have you. So I've been following you on Instagram for a while. You're one of those guys who's talking about things that are a bit off the beaten path.
So kind of like you.
Yeah, I was thinking about that, the idea that when I was looking at your work, I was like, there's something really intriguing here, but also this guy's just talking in a way that is so far off of what everyone else is talking about. It's hard to completely gauge how much to buy in. And I imagine that's how a lot of people feel when they first see my stuff. It's like, okay.
Yeah, because it's kind of weird. I mean, I was also simultaneously checking out your stuff because I've heard about the things that you do, and which we'll get much deeper into.
Yeah.
And it was a crazy universe thing, man. And somebody just said, "Do you guys know each other?" And I'm like, "No, but it'd be cool to." And then all of a sudden, just bam, here we are.
Yeah. So let's just start with your background a little bit, right? So your brand is Stop Chasing Pain.
Yes.
Which I think is a wonderful name, and I think that.
Thank you very much. Yeah, I kind of came to me. The story about that is that I was. Well, let me kind of start from the beginning. I got in the world of healthcare from getting hurt myself. I'm from bodybuilding, and I was doing movement, but it was very repetitive movement, right? And you're just concerned about aesthetics at that standpoint, and that's okay, right? You just got to realize that it comes with some issues when you do it. And it just caught up with me where I got hurt in my lower back. Then I got helped by a chiropractor, and I decided to become one a few years later. But I always thought that there was something else missing to the fundamental puzzle. And it ended up, for me, a big discovery of just human movement, right? I was thinking of what's the one thing that we all have in common that we do that we probably don't do enough of or really look at, and that was human movement. And that got me in the work of my first movement mentor, and probably the biggest one to this day, Gray Cook, who is a physical therapist that many people listening to your show might know. And then they just started to relate the stuff that maybe you're hurting at a place in your body because you're not moving well in a place that's outside of the site of pain, which just immediately attracted my attention. And I went to one of his first fundamental workshops, and a slide came up that had 3 words on it in red. It said, "Stop Chasing Pain." And it just kind of hit me like I'm supposed to be here. And then at that moment, time froze. And I joked with him to say, that's the moment I stopped listening. And I did a Google search on GoDaddy to see if the domain name was available. And it was. So I snagged it. And then I asked him later if I could use it. So, you do it, then you ask for forgiveness later kind of thing. And he said, yeah. And it started from there. And then the whole premise was, you treat pain, of course, right? And then, but you don't want to just caught up in chasing it, which means just doing the same things to where it hurts, or many different things to where it hurts. And that led me to kind of where I am now with movement, because I would start trying to move the areas that hurt on people more and trying to get them afraid of not moving. But when you're in pain, you don't want to move because you're scared to move. So I had a novel idea. Let me just have you move the rest of your body a lot that doesn't hurt.
Yeah.
It's like exploratory movement, which is play, basically. Yeah. And an amazing thing happened. They just started to feel so much better, and their confidence built up, their life came back, and it was just something that I never looked back from that moment.
Yeah, I think about when it comes to pain, I think about the idea of basically I want to feed my nervous system as much information that helps it bring the alarm level down. And I also want to I want to give the kinesthetic map as much information that helps it localize where the pain is, right? Because it's easy for the pain signal to spread, right? It's like, oh, you injured your back, but where, right?
Mm-hmm.
You know, you can be in pain. You could feel pain in your entire back. Might not even be your back, right? But I found that like by doing little things and trying to edge around where the pain is, all of a sudden I can get it to be localized much more tightly.
Yeah, exactly. And what's interesting with the way that pain science is progressing, which is quite fascinating, a current theory that I happen to agree with, is that many times you have most of the pain in an area where you don't have a lot of sensory awareness, proprioceptive awareness, kinesthetic awareness, interoceptive awareness, you name it. I mean, it's so many different types. I just know that your body doesn't have an awareness of an area. And then what was fascinating to me is that they proposed that one of the ways that your body can become more aware of an area that it has lost awareness in is to make it hurt.
Mm-hmm.
Because then you're always aware of it because it hurts. So it's actually a very powerful protective strategy. And then that's what people that need to realize, that pain is not a punishment from your body. It's a protective strategy from your body. It doesn't seem like that when you're suffering so much. You get in this kind of battle with your body, this hate relationship, because you don't understand why it's doing what it's doing. And that brings in an emotional component to pain, but there's always an emotional component to movement as well. So it's like a full circle. And if you can become empowered to know, you say you've got an area where your low back hurts, which is a very common injury for people. You're kind of scared to do anything, because I've been there. Mm-hmm. But you forget that 99% of the rest of your body is probably pretty damn good. Mm-hmm. But you focus just on the negative. We're kind of hardwired to focus on the bad, and it takes work and effort to focus on the positive. But if you can learn that you can move, holy cow, I mean, I can move my legs, I can move my feet, my hands, my arms, my head, my ankles, my shoulders, my hips, and then my back. You know, I don't feel pain when I do that. And then that feeds that system, like you said before, and then you become empowered emotionally and physically to then be able to move. Because sometimes you have pain because of the fear of moving. You manifest pain because you have a fear of the pain when you move. So it's a self-fulfilling prophecy.
Yeah, absolutely. Are you familiar with Todd Hargrove?
Sure.
Yeah. He's a friend of mine. And one thing he wrote in one of his books that I really liked was this idea that, you know, if you don't use an area, the motor map of the area sort of breaks down. And you can imagine it kind of like one of those old medieval maps, that wherever the motor map has broken down enough, it's like, here be dragons.
Right. Yeah, exactly. Great metaphor. Yeah, it's so true.
And so that anxiety becomes a source of pain in and of itself.
Oh, yeah, big time. That's what makes us human beings, the emotional component that comes into play, you know, and that's all based in neurology and neuroscience, basically.
Yeah.
So that one thing that I gravitated towards movement, but I also became really turned off that we were making movement so complicated. Mm-hmm. And we're in a quote unquote corrective exercise environment, rehabilitation environment, and we're trying to get people to get out of pain, and we're putting them into some movements and to get them to move better, you might say. And we're coaching them / cueing them, but we're putting so much anxiety on them that they need to do a movement the right way or the wrong way. And I don't believe there is a right way or a wrong way to move by any means. I just believe there's different ways to move. And when you put it in that context, it's much more successful for your brain to feel comfortable moving in many different things, even into areas where it hurts, because you're going to have pain at some point in your life. But so I tried to get more variation, variability, and variety, the thing that I learned from my friend Joanne Elphinston, who talks about the 3 V's. And then that tied into the stuff that I learned about the brain and how it needs novelty, it needs difference in order to compare A and B together so we can learn the differences between the two. So if you don't give it a lot of differences, how's it going to understand anything that changes? So I found that if you do the same type of movements all the time, you can get hurt, right?
Yeah.
And if you don't do movements, you can get hurt. So what happens is that you should move. My thing now is I call what's 4M motion, which means move more of yourself, more often, more ways, and more environments. I'm not telling you how to move or what to do. I'm just giving you the parameters. And that sounds a lot like just saying the word play, which is what it is. And I found that people would have so much anxiety with me teaching them to move that, oh my God, I mean, if your pelvis is at 15 degrees and not 20, it's wrong. And I need them to be able to become empowered to feel comfortable moving when I'm not there. So now what I do is I have you move and put your pelvis in every single damn angle you can possibly conceive of, and need to be okay with it, right? And play was really important to me because one of the things that they're finding with pain science is that the fear of threat is something that can manifest as stiffness or tightness in the body, or pain. So pain is a response to a perceived threat, which means it doesn't have to be real or not. It can be imagined. And one of the things that your body is always usually in a state of looking out for what's going to get me and, make sure that I'm not dead, that I'm okay. So we need safety. We need a background of safety when we move, right? So we can move with confidence. And I found from looking at neuroscience is that the reason that play works so great is because you're moving, but you also have this built-in background of safety with it because it's play. So you're moving, but you're not really paying attention to how you're moving. You're just interacting with something or someone, and you just move. You move without thinking. So I tell people, don't think, just feel.
Yeah. With the way we design movement games, we talk about the 5 S's, and 4 of them are the most important for what we're talking about here. But you have to have safety. That's the first parameter. And then you need success, right? There has to be a way within the game that makes you feel like you're gaining something.
Right.
You can play a game that's safe, but if you're constantly getting beat, it won't be engaging over the long run.
That's psychology right there. Yeah. Yeah.
And then you need struggle, right? If there's nothing that you're pushing against, no chance to grow, it's not going to be engaging. And then in order to achieve those things, it has to be scalable, right? So good games have this ability to match themselves to the level of the participants. So that element of safety is so key. And I think it's interesting because, I was listening to one of your interviews and you were talking about when you're looking at pain, the top thing on your hierarchy is actually the emotional system. You don't even want to talk about that most of the time because people aren't ready to hear it.
Not until you've had enough suffering in your life, then you are.
But I think this is interesting because this is what I've gotten out of play research and flow state research is the emotional subtext of a effort has an enormous impact on what the output of that effort is, right? So if I can train you and I give 2 people the same training environment, but have one have a coach who's harassing them and beating them down and making them feel like they suck and they're miserable all the time. And the other has a really emotionally supportive coach and really great training partners. It's like, it doesn't matter if they do the same sets and reps, they're not going to get the same results.
Yeah, exactly. That's why it comes down to coaching, is an art to it. I mean, there's certainly some science to it, but there's an art to it. There's a human being element. People always ask me, what role does emotion play in pain or sports performance? And my answer is yes. I mean, it plays all of it. It's a classic. You watch any great sports redeeming success story movie ever made, most of the time it's something where they have this mental demon that they need to overcome. And then in the end of the movie, right, they're getting their ass kicked most of the time. They're almost tapped out, and then something flips a switch And then the next thing you know, they end up coming through in the end. Meanwhile, they failed so many times in the past, right? You meet the opponent who kicks your ass in the movie, and then you want to come back and beat him in the end, and you've trained all this time, and then you're at the end and you're getting your ass kicked again, and you realize that maybe it wasn't so much the training. I mean, it's a part of it, but you had to flip that switch. Mm-hmm. So any great athlete, they'll tell you the champions are made from the neck up in many ways, from how your brain functions from a physiological standpoint to make sure it doesn't have inflammation in it, called neuroinflammation, and most people do in this world, but also your thought process that you have, your viewpoint about yourself, and the world that you live in. People experience that all the time, where I just tell them, have you ever been completely alone and kind of like some of the world is now? And you've thought about something that's been very stressful for you, or the stress that you're in, and can you feel this wave of physiology completely change in your body? And you didn't leave the room, and it happened in a split second. And then you can flip the switch and think of something that was very wonderful or joyous or a thrill in your life that could have happened decades prior. And then this blanket comes over you and you feel completely different. Mm-hmm. That was just based on the emotional context of your brain putting this scrapbook together, and then you painted a picture, a story for yourself. So you can change the story anytime. That's the most empowering part. And I see people in chronic pain, man. I mean, you don't see me first when you get hurt. You see me when you've been through a lot of stuff, and then what's supposed to help you never helped you, or it did and it stopped helping you, or it made you worse. Then you're usually open and receptive to the stuff that I'm going to be going over with you. And I'll usually never do what somebody else has already done for you, because if you needed that, you wouldn't have found me. You would have already been better, you know? So some of the context, honestly, in my world of rehab, I tried to bring more of a playful interaction with people and movements to this world of being so serious with what we're doing. And many people thought that I was like, yeah, what kind of doctor is this where you're just having me do these play games? But that was just more of the mental thing for them. And then once they started to do it and let this guard down, as we have as human beings, we're kind of wrapped in this hard shell. And they started to feel better and smile and laugh. And the beautiful thing that I've learned when you do playful movement is that you're not focusing on your pain. You're just focusing on the playful movement or the task at hand. Play usually has some underlying, it seems arbitrary, but it's not. Play is not arbitrary at all. It's usually very task-oriented driven. You're just not obsessed with the end goal of the task. You're just involved in the moment that you're in. That's what I like about it. You're in the moment that you're in, and you're not really thinking about what just happened and what's coming next. You just are. And that's a big component to healing.
Yeah, for some reason, the thing that pops in my head is, you know, if you ask an evolutionary biologist, why do men play guitar? They'll tell you that men play guitar in order to get women, right? Or to
correct, yes. Yeah.
Right? But there's an interesting thing there, because some guys know that that's what they're trying to do. Mm-hmm. And some guys love playing guitar.
Right.
The ones who are very attractive to women are the ones who are loving playing the guitar, not doing it specifically as a performance.
Yeah, it comes through.
And so there's
the authenticity of it comes through.
Yeah. So there's this thing about finding those places that are deeply intrinsically rewarding to you. And that means that they have to be, you know, where did I come across this word? Autotelic, right? They are their own goal, right? Play is autotelic. I believe that was in Mihai Csikszentmihalyi's book, Flow, right? The autotelic life. So when you're doing things because they have that, it doesn't mean that they're that because they're sufficient within themselves, it doesn't mean that they don't have all these other impacts. But you get them for free, basically.
Yeah, it's like what is your intention of going into anything? Well, it will change the outcome of everything. The intention and attention is huge.
Yeah, absolutely. So I wanted to dig into that. One thing I've noticed over the years, I've had a number of friends who've had real problems with chronic pain, and I've like over the course of my training career, I've had chondromalacia in my knee. I've had 8 severe ankle sprains on each ankle. One of them a bad high ankle sprain. Torn my Achilles tendon. I've had a couple back spasms. Torn my rotator cuff. Popped both my collarbones and both AC joints and one of my SC joints. Subluxated my cuboid bone. Torn ligaments in both my feet. And I've had some kind of bad back injury where I, had a hyperextension moment when I was doing a really big front flip coming down out of a front flip. And so it's like I've accumulated lots of potential sources of pain. But I feel like the thing that has allowed me to continue to grow and progress and at 38 be getting better is this refusal to sort of conceptualize myself as an injured person. And I see these people who they start chasing the pain, right? Where they're obsessed with their pain and always everything is going towards that. And they're always worried about how something's going to trigger that injury again.
Right.
And to me, it's like, they're sure that there's some, I have this conversation with people all the time where they're just sure there's something wrong with them biomechanically, right? And I'm like, you've been having this pain for 5 years, like whatever the original biomechanical thing was, right? The acute injury is almost certainly resolved. But they're like, no, it's got to be biomechanics. I just have to shift, my gait. I have to change, my pelvic tilt. I have to, my ribs are too flared, and that's why my back is hurting. And it's so hard for people to accept this idea that a lot of that stuff is normal variation. Chasing it's not going to help necessarily get you there.
Yeah.
The potential is that what you have is a psychological injury. You have an injury of the perception of yourself. And if that's not resolved, the pain won't necessarily go away. That's my perception. And it's so hard for people to do that. I don't know what is it that makes it so hard for people to accept the idea that a psychological injury can be just as real as the physical injury. And that's where you might be.
It's almost like I can't fault them. It's the social environment that we were raised in. And that's pretty much what you were taught. And that's even what medicine is taught for so long. It's the old discard type of touch the fire, and then the fire sends the pain signal up, and I have the damage, and then I perceive my pain type thing. And then that's a model that's still taught today, actually. And but they're finding now that pain is not an input signal. Pain is an output signal.
Yeah. And
then nothing changes your output signal more than how you choose to interpret what goes in. What goes out is actually not what goes in. What goes out is your interpretation of just what went in, right? So it's really under your control, the master of your control. So it's just that you don't know what you don't know. And you have these environments where you're fed opioids and braces and interventions and surgeries, and they're supposed to get better, but there's countless studies showing that they actually went in, and so one case study was quite fascinating. People had chronic knee pain, and they had a group that they actually did the surgery to. Then it had a group where they didn't do any of the surgery to them at all. They just made it look like it, right? And then they came out, and then there was zero difference between the people that had the surgery and those that didn't. They just thought they were better because somebody did something to the body part. Mm-hmm. And then that's when there's blue pill, red pill kind of stuff. So I can't fault them for it. Honestly, it's really hard to wrap your mind around it, especially when you're the one suffering. I've been there for sure, but when you look at the science, there's no correlation between the level of pain or extent of pain that somebody has and the amount of damage done to a body part somewhere at all. Because so many people are walking around that are really messed up on x-rays or ultrasounds or MRIs, and you tell them that and they're like, oh, well, thanks for letting me know. I don't feel anything. I'm good. And then there's some people that can't move, and then you can't find anything on the MRI, and they just can't grasp it when they go. And the interesting, I got into this work because I started to see a lot of chronic pain patients and autoimmune type patients as well. They usually will start to develop autoimmune type symptoms where the body begins to turn on itself after cataclysmic, very high threshold emotional event usually kicks off chronic pain. But you're going to see a lot more of a spike in that because of what's going on in the world today with the amount of stress that we're under. A lot of autoimmune disorders will manifest or get recycled back and get reactivated, or some chronic pain stuff may irritate people more. And I actually was one of those people in the beginning that discounted the role of emotion in pain. I laughed it off, to be completely honest with you, because I wasn't ready to see it yet. I just didn't have the lens yet. So I know what it's like because I'm a human being as well. And it's only when I was really, really sick and near death's bed, where medicine tried to help me and damn near killed me, or I had really severe low back pain that nothing was really helping me, that I started to get into the emotional based work and deal with my concept of body parts and pain and stuff like that. And one of the first individuals I came across was, I was listening to Howard Stern one day, and Howard Stern talked about his chronic low back pain, and he mentioned a guy named Dr. John Sarno, Sarno.
Yeah.
And he was one of the early pioneers of back pain not having to do with biomechanical issues if it's chronic, that is completely emotional. And I was like, dude, if it's good enough for Stern, man, I'll give it a shot. And I read the book, and he even says there's going to be resistance to this for people. But it made sense when I started to go after it. It takes a lot of work. And he had a term in there that I use all the time now when I teach that's called TMS, tension myoneural syndrome. Mm-hmm. Tension myoneural syndrome basically means this. Tension means tension. Yeah. Myo means muscle. Neuro means nerve. So if you have excess stress and tension in your life, usually from your thought process, right? When you think a certain way, you get stress, tight, and tension. It can also happen from repetitive motion, right? Or not doing movement. But it's mostly thought driven from stress. That excess tension decreases blood flow and oxygenation to tissue, and then muscles start to perish, and then nerves begin to perish, and then you can have a biomechanical component from that, but it's because of the tension that you're actually under from your thought process. So if you can decrease your thought process, you can change your physiology. So how you think changes your biology. They call it psychoneuroimmunology. Psycho, thoughts, neuro, immunology. So how you think affects your nervous system and your immune system. It's still a relatively new field, but it's coming around. But it's integrating all of the systems together. And I started to practice the techniques. It didn't have, one of the things that's frustrating for people is they're looking for a quick fix. Like if I take a pill and my pain goes away, they want that to happen with this work too. And it takes a while. It takes some effort and time to do that. And then I started to look at the brain and look at movement and how much of our brain is actually dedicated to what we think that we're doing. And so when we think about moving, there's only 10% of your brain that's devoted to voluntary movement, right? The other 90% is reflexive, which means it automatically happens. You don't have to think about it. And that's the reflexive stabilization survival one. That's the one that kicks in to keep you alive, not the one that you're thinking about.
Yeah.
And then that led me into understanding the stress response, because the stress response affects that 90%. That primal brain. So decreasing stress, I tell people, is the number one way that you can decrease chronic pain and chronic disease in your life. But it's such a big buzzword now, just decrease stress. First of all, what the hell does that mean, right? But then they just discount it like that because, yeah, I've already heard that. And I'm like, okay, but what are you doing about it kind of thing? But if you can decrease that, you actually affect 90% of your brain, right? And then that's why play is so great. And the movement is so great, of just going out and climbing something is so great because you're decreasing stress when you do that. Yeah. That's why I look at it as, dude, we're decreasing stress when you're putting these in the movement patterns. And it cycles back to what I told you before. So I've got somebody in pain. First of all, I'm probably going to give them way too many corrective exercises at one time. They're already under stress. They're going to get tense and tight because they're worried about they're doing it wrong. And I'm over cueing them and they're stressing out already. So I was actually making people worse by the program that I was putting them under. But I had to step outside of that because I'm having some people play with a damn balloon, or I take a stick and I say, don't let me touch you with the stick. And then they're moving around and they're not paying attention to their shoulder, to their back. They're just paying attention to the stick and don't hit the stick. And they're playing. And it's like, it doesn't look like it's serious, the therapy work that I'm doing, but it actually really is. Yeah. And I read a quote once from somebody that stuck with me that says there's zero correlation between appearing to be serious and actually being good at what you do. And I'm like, that's so great. And you know what? I just go by the person that's in front of me. If I can get my person in pain to crack a smile or do a laugh, that's a checkbox. When you understand neurology, that's a checkbox in the 90% box that affects how you move, not the 10%. Does that make sense?
Oh yeah. I mean, yeah, it's right in line with what we do, right? Like one of our challenges that we ask people all the time, right? We warm them up at our seminars, and we warm them up with games. We warm them up with ball games specifically a lot of the time.
Yeah.
And then some like partnering games. And at the end of it, everybody's smiling, everybody's sweating. They've been through big ranges of motion, and they've laughed. And so we always say, oh, okay, we ask them, did that happen for you? And they always say yes. And then we say, well, how often do you address that in your warm up? Right? If you think about a warm up, is a warm up like, are you treating your body as like literally just a machine that you need to increase the temperature of? Or are you addressing the activation of the emotional and cognitive as well as the physical to achieve a ready state to engage in high intensity, really effective, tapping into flow state movement? So yeah, absolutely makes sense to me.
Yeah, well, most people have heard this, and they probably know the answer. If I ask the people who are listening, what's the best medicine? Laughter. See, you already know it. Yeah. You already know what it is. And that goes back to, I'm not discounting the need for medical or therapeutic interventions, right? I mean, you have to keep it in context. Listen, if your arm's hanging off, you're not going to come play a ball with me. You're going to put your arm back on. Yeah. But when your arm's back on, I'm going to tell you, there's a pretty safe bet. You might have some chronic pain related to that, the way they put it back on, the amount of trauma that was done, and not to mention the amount of emotional connection you're going to have to that trauma, your arm hanging off. And I need to be able to put that in context for you. So you'll have that world that's going to put your arm on, but then later you're going to need to come in. They ultimately need to come into your world, because one of the things that gets people out of pain is, one, just getting really strong. Yeah. And then people ask me, well, what is your definition of strength? And mine is this: being able to control your own body mass in all different situations. That's true strength. And then that's play. Like I need to be able to climb. I'm going to tell you this. I got people that can lift 500 pounds off the floor. There's no way they could climb a tree. No way in living hell they can climb a tree. But they can pull it off the floor. And I said, man, imagine if you climbed a tree, how much you could pull off that floor.
So let's talk about climbing for a second. I have this thing about, there's all this research that shows that crawling has these very interesting impacts on tons of different systems, right? It's a pretty novel thing in the training world to really have all these crawls.
Yeah.
And I think that's great, but I also think it's like the reason that crawling in particular may be getting picked up is because we live in this cage of flat ground and flat walls, right? So it's like, that's the world that we can see, and crawling's available there.
Mm-hmm.
But if you think about, cross-lateral control and patterning and complex movement orientation and moving your body through different planes of motion, think about climbing, right? Mm-hmm. And I think that if the research starts going there, starts looking at it, you'll find that if you want to wire a human up to move well and to be, well integrated between all of these systems, you're going to find that climbing is going to have this enormous impact, because from an evolutionary perspective, that was our primary mode of locomotion for possibly like 90 million years. They think that primates started specializing in trees maybe 90 million years ago, before the dinosaurs went extinct. Mm. And then, we came down and became terrestrial, I don't know, 5 million years ago. So it's deep in our heritage. So I'm curious what your perspective is on climbing and how you're looking at it neurologically, and like what might we find if we dug into this?
Oh, I think it's fascinating. I think honestly, it's one of my favorite forms of keeping you really strong and resilient, and #monster, honestly. And it's a great form of rehabilitation, but there's a lot to it, right? There's different forms of climbing, first of all. And it's like anything else, you have to work up to it. And so I look at crawling as a form of climbing. Your load is different, right? But that's start to where you get some of your patterning to be able to reach up with one arm in extension and have another one in flexion. And the same thing with the legs. So it's like a cross-body pattern. So you have these fundamental neurological patterns that manifest usually as human gait. That's opposite side, opposite body. But you do it on the ground in an environment where you're very stable, that you have a lot more of your body in contact with the earth. But it takes an immense amount of strength to move your own body mass on the floor. I mean, if anybody listening has done stuff like gymnastica natural or Brazilian jiu-jitsu or animal flow or Budokan or anything like that, it's not easy, man. And plus, I get people on the ground and I have them just do a fundamental rolling pattern, roll from your back, roll to your stomach, and don't use momentum. And most people can't move at all. They're just stuck because their body just forgot how to move, honestly. So I'll start you there. But then when you start to climb something as well, you're tying in immediate reflexive core stabilization, which means you don't have to think about turning on your transverse abdominis at all. Because when you grab something and you reach for something, that's reflexively going to radiate through your whole body. And you're going to be using your hands, which are neurologically driven into your brain. Your hands represent a huge amount of sensory data to your head, an enormous amount. So the very act of gripping something is a sensory turbo nitro to your head. And many people have weak hands. And if you can strengthen up your hands, holy cow, is this crazy? But when I did the climb, my shoulder feels so much damn better. No, it makes complete sense because you had weak ass hands. That grip that we need to go, the oppositional grip, that's uniquely human. So you feel a lot of stuff with your hand. Then you use your feet at the same time, and you're going to use muscles in your feet you never knew you had in order to grip onto something. So it automatically works the muscles of your foot. And then if I combine hand with foot, then I'm getting this whole full body system together. And then we know that what sits in the middle is going to have this reaction to it this way. And then here's what I love about climbing as well, because one, you're going to get stabilization somewhere, because if you don't have it somewhere and you're getting it from the wrong spot, you're going to know quick, fast, and hurry, because you're going to fatigue really fast. Or you're going to fall. But that's also where, in my world, you have to be careful. There's an underlying threat response that goes with climbing for the fear of falling, which I think is kind of innate in everyone. But you also need to keep that in mind of what you're having someone climb, because perception makes a difference. A great example is that I can have you walk across a 2x4 on the ground,
Mhm.
and you feel great because it's on the ground. But if I put it 2 feet off the ground, the same 2x4, you're very scared. So I have to keep this, depending on the individual that I'm working with, climbing. So one of the things that I teach people, even the elderly people, is I have them go down to the ground and get back up again a lot of different ways. And sometimes I'll say, I want you to go down to the ground and you just use something that you can hold on to and climb up with. So it's a form of climbing. It's a regress form of climbing, but you have to keep it in contact with the person that you're working in. And then here's the thing that I love about climbing is one of the reasons that it works so well is because I know 99.9% of humans don't do any form of it now.
Yeah. So sad. So, I mean, one thing that popped into my head that I thought about a lot is, I have 3 young children. I have a 2-year-old, a 5-year-old, and a 7-year-old. So I've watched all of them develop. And developmentally, they start with rolling, right? Well, it's flexion, extension, and then rolling.
Yeah.
And then crawling, right? Or basing and then crawling. But then it's climbing. It's climbing before it's walking, because the first thing that they start doing is pulling themselves up things.
Right.
To get to an upright torso and then moving themselves across things. And this is actually also the evolutionary pattern, because the origin of the upright torso in mammals and primates comes from climbing, right? Because you have an animal that moves around the ground on all fours, and then it basically takes that motion and learns to traction and grab with the hands and go up something.
Yeah.
And of course, the shoulder develops when we learn to hang from
something. Right.
So all those things are both developmentally and evolutionarily, there's a pattern of development, right? And if you miss it, you're missing a huge piece. I think of this as the way that I tend to think of kind of traditional sport culture is, or not for sport culture, but exercise culture, is it's kind of like chemists who've never eaten food trying to figure out diet, right?
Right. Right.
Right.
Yeah.
And they're like isolating molecules and they're like, oh, that'd probably be good for people. Let's put it together with this thing. Right. But they haven't actually gone out and just had a steak. They've never had a steak. They don't need to eat. Right. And for me, the steak, the potatoes is climb, run, jump. These are the whole food movements. And the more that they replicate the kind of stuff that we had in our evolutionary environment, the more like the more whole it is. So climbing, doing a pull-up is a climbing exercise.
Yeah.
It's a climbing exercise with very low variability, very low levels of, proprioceptive engagement, very few force vectors moving through the body. And then, something like a ladder on a wall. Like, I don't know if you've ever seen Fit Wall.
Yeah.
Okay, so that's like one level of complexity higher. And then you could have like a flat rock climbing wall, and then a more complex one. And then you have like moving between multiple trunk trees where you're orienting towards everything in the space around you, right? Where your movement space is not this anymore. It's everything, right? You have to orient here. And that to me is going to be the best food for your brain.
Yeah, and it's I love, because when you're climbing, that's the only thing it's the only thing you're thinking of. You're not thinking of what happened yesterday. Did I put that in the oven? I can't remember if I put that in the oven. You're probably not thinking about that. You're thinking about your surroundings and your environment, and you're taking in a lot of different things at the same time, but you're very in the moment. And most people typically don't feel a lot of things that they would normally feel, quote unquote, that hurts, because their attention has changed. And then that safety component comes back too. It was interesting. I watched something where they did a context of somebody who, say you want to learn how to do like a flip.
Yeah.
If you were learning how to do a flip and you had a hard floor, you'd probably be really scared to do a flip. Right? You wouldn't explore. Yeah. But they put all these mesh little foam things in the pit.
Yeah.
And then when you know that you're gonna be okay if you don't land right, then you just let yourself go. You have this sort of freedom, and it's a great representation of an analogy of how when you can decrease the threat response tension and exploration begins to improve
Mhm.
when you do that. But I've also found it interesting with play is one of the things that's most stressful for a human being is they don't want to look silly.
Yeah.
And sometimes you can have these great ideas, but I wouldn't necessarily have my client begin to do it like out on the gym floor and other people, because you have that social pressure, social stress, and you think everybody's looking at me of what this person is doing and whether they're looking stupid when they do it, because nobody ultimately wants to look stupid. And then I'll bring them in an environment where it's just them and me, and it's a vastly different kind of experience. So there's a lot of things that go into the context of play than just starting to play. Yeah. Because it's individual driven. And that's why when you have your groups and your trainings, you probably see a transformation in the humans that are with you from the first day to the end, right?
Massive. It's kind of, for me, this is a funny personal story, because I think that I'm very low in anxiety naturally, right? Like on a Big 5 personality test, I test at like the 1th percentile for negative emotion. So I'm quite tolerant of other people's criticisms, and I just don't get a big emotional reaction to it. I'm also very high in disagreeability, right? So if other people, just because other people are into it doesn't mean that I'm going to go along a lot of the time. Mm-hmm. So, I came out of parkour, right? I had a martial arts background, gymnastics background, then went into parkour. And then, eventually it was like, I really wanted to take it into nature and to expand the scope. And I had to walk away completely from the community because there just weren't people who were ready to go with me. And so I was training on my own, alone, for 2 years in the woods. And I was very happy, right? There was certainly loneliness from losing the community that I'd been in. But the training was absolutely fantastic. Like every time I was out there, I was absolutely joy, like incredible flow states. And then I started teaching. I had been teaching these events, right? And over time, it went from like 3 days to 5 days to 7 days to 8 days. And I would always ask the people at the end of the seminar, like, what was the most meaningful thing for you? And they would tell me, and I would always like be waiting for them to say, oh, it was that jump that I did, or it was learning this movement thing. It was never that. And the first thing that comes to everyone's mind is always the people, right? It was how connected I felt. It was the people that I was with. It was this feeling of, it has to do with this tribal aspect of us. And I've come to realize that the psychology of people who are early adopters of parkour is quite unique. And what holds a lot of people back, I think there's a couple things, but a lot of it is this being silly in public, right? Parkour is a practice where in order to get started, you have to go look like a fool in a public place. Mm-hmm. And so it's been predominantly adopted by teenage males because they're the group of people who are most willing to look foolish, and also generally the people who can progress from the foolish stage to the elegant stage relatively rapidly. But I've known so many people who, who've come into it, who've had that experience of just the movement's fun and intriguing. And if I'm in the right social environment, it's great. But if I have to go out on my own and other people are going to look at me, I can't do it.
Yeah.
And I think it's too bad because the way that parkour has been popularized now, via especially Instagram, it's so much seen as just risk taking. But I think that at its root, parkour there's something happening there that is like the biggest revolution in understanding how a human being can move and what we're capable of and how that can impact you everywhere else. But it's kind of the barrier to entry is very hard for other people to even start paying attention to it.
Yeah, agreed. Yeah, that's why I like when you talked about your initial S's.
Yeah.
You have to allow that win, that success, right? And then I think it was something where it was fascinating. I think it was Jordan Peterson who wrote the book 12 Rules for Life or something. And he talked about a study. I think it was with mice, but it was
rats.
Something where rats.
Yeah.
I mean, the big rat has to allow the smaller rat to win every once in a while. Otherwise, the small rat just doesn't want to play anymore.
Yeah.
It's like, I mean, if it's hardwired in a rat, you know it's going to be the same way for humans. Otherwise, you're going to check out. I don't want to play with you because I'll never win. I don't have a chance.
Yeah, I first came across that idea in Stuart Brown's work. Do you follow Stuart Brown?
Yes, of course. Yeah. Great book, right?
His book, Play. So he talks about Panksepp's rats as well. I don't think he mentions Panksepp's name, though. So I encountered it from Brown. And then I ran into Jordan Peterson, very influenced by his work. And he has a really wonderful article, like a primary source article on the role of rough and tumble play in the control of aggression.
Mm-hmm.
That's really worth people looking into.
Agreed.
And then he turned me on to Jaak Panksepp, and I've gone and read. I have effective neurobiology on my or effective neurology on my bookshelf as well.
Yeah.
Really, that chapter on the roughhousing very closely. So that's been a huge influence on the way that we think about this. So we're, I think play research and the constraints-led, ecological dynamics perspective, bringing these things into the martial arts and parkour and connecting them it's this incredibly rich place for a synthesis that really gives us a new view into how we look at physical culture. And I was actually just talking to Kelly Starrett. And so after our interview, I was talking about this Jaak Panksepp thing because what I think that we've done is we've operantly conditioned several generations of human beings to dislike, to be scared of, and to be threatened by physical activity.
Yeah.
Because kids prior to basically the 1980s, right? It started in the 80s, but got worse and worse and worse through the 90s and the aughts and now. They mostly organize their own play. And kids negotiate play and self-handicap in order to retain playmates. And they learn to do this process that keeps play going. So that's great. And they learn a tremendous amount from that. But we took away more and more of that. We got scared that they were going to get taken by abductors, and then, that we need to get them into Harvard, and more. There was all these things that slowly eroded unstructured play. But we need them to exercise. And so at the same time, we had so much academic focus that we didn't even want PE. So everything got funneled into the team sport world, right? The way that you get your kid exercise is you sign them up for youth soccer when they're 5 years old. Soccer's a great game. Football's a great game. Baseball's a great game. All these games are great. For those kids, they're great if the kid, especially when the kid gets to organize it themselves. Right. But the problem is that once you have a professionalized, winning-oriented, adult, structured imposition of these games on kids, what's happening is that the kids are no longer able to regulate the game so that the less physically capable kids at any stage of development have enough success to stay interested. Right. And so some percentage of the kids in first grade or kindergarten basically learn the lesson that engaging in physical activity is punishing, and they are socially shamed for not being physically competent enough.
Yeah, and it's one of the primary ways that you learn to socialize with another human being, right? And to know that give and take for someone. And but you have that fear of, well, it's just not fair. Well, that's how you learn what fair, unfair actually means, right? And then that dynamic of that's what life is, right? And then I remember because now I think that the playgrounds, they're taken away, and then I think I read somewhere that I couldn't even believe when I heard it, that they outlawed the game of tag.
Yeah, that was.
And my jaw dropped to the ground because I'm like, oh, really? That's like one of the best games you could ever play for your whole body.
It's one of the fundamental games, right? Like kids have to roughhouse and they have to play tag and they have to explore the environment.
Talk about learning to accelerate and decelerate and shift and move, because most athletes get hurt because they can't decelerate. They can't slow down and serpentine and jag and weave. And, you have that variability of you just don't know when they're coming or where they're going to try to touch you and stuff like that. And then we're so litigious and worry about kids getting hurt. But that's taking away from your ability to integrate yourself into a society and kind of naturally see where you land. And the dirty little secret is that if you want to excel at those individual sports like baseball or basketball, it's really not by playing more of that sport. I mean, that's a big part of it, right? I mean, that's practicing your skill set, but doesn't mean you're a good mover either. Because most of them are not good movers. So if you can learn to do movement, I think it was Ido Portal, you probably know him, many people do. He said, we're human beings first, we're movers second, and we're specialists third.
Yeah.
And that stuck with me, because you can be a much better specialist if you're a better mover. And that's why moving is in the middle. Because if you can become a better mover, in my opinion, that'll make you a better human.
Yeah. I mean, I think it can. It doesn't always. So this is one of the things that I'm really interested in with like interacting with the embodiment community and stuff like that. The idea of, so take a jump in parkour, right? A jump can be an opportunity to confront fear and to learn something about courage that you can then generalize to the rest of your life. But it can also be a place where once you've developed confidence, you can go back and say, I'm okay, I'm courageous because I do that over here, but I haven't generalized. And it becomes a place to avoid, right? I think this is true with everything, right? I think that that yoga works this way, that meditation works this way, that without an intent to generalize and to recognize that the movement itself, it's not sufficient. I mean, it is sufficient because it's enjoyable. But if you think you're getting everything out of it, that can be a trap, right? Because you have to see how it's impacting the rest of your life. So it's important to have that human layer at the top, right? It's like human first. Is this, if you're practicing all the time and you're becoming better and you're this amazing mover, and because of that, you're like crabby at everybody around you and you're like super competitive and like being a dick to all of your roommates because they're also movers and you want to be better than them. It's like, is this really good for you? Is this really what you like to be? But yeah, I think that
that's why I like to play so much, because I think if you can have that play element to it, I mean, I think that definitely will make you become a better human towards other people, because you're just becoming a better human with yourself, right? And then I don't think I've ever seen somebody who specializes in a sport not improve by introducing more of a play element into their life, because it also we need for the people who do the sport specific type of training, or you find that people usually like to do exercises or movements that they're good at. They don't like to do things. So if you do yoga all the time, it's probably because you're really good at it or you're genetically built for it, and you're probably not going to go strength train or something. And then you've got the opposite the same way. You need to have that exploration, and it makes you much more resilient as a human being to overcome things that will come across your path. That's what happened to me. I remember I started bodybuilding when I was 14 because I was fat, I was overweight, I was shy, I got picked on a lot, and I felt socially inadequate. And I just came across Arnold Schwarzenegger's autobiography, and it changed my life. And I started to lift to change my life. Yeah. But as many people listening may know, I mean, you can get caught up in that, and then your self-worth becomes locked to your physical appearance. And so it's a different rabbit hole. But I also looked great, but I couldn't move great or perform great. And I was getting hurt all the time, honestly. I had back pain, shoulder pain, things like that. But I just wasn't ready to see it yet. I just kept going. And then a friend of mine exposed me for the first time to Ginnastica Natural from Alvaro Rovato and Brazilian Jiu-Jitsu. And he was a patient of mine. And he came and, boy, that was one of the most humbling. By the end of that hour, I think it was wiped for a week. It was very humbling of, man, I have zero movement in my hips. And I couldn't bring my own body mass down the mat. And it was eye-opening, but I stuck with it and went back into it. I eased more into it after that. And I started to notice some physical changes in my body that I just never expected to see. And I'm 53 years old right now, and I honestly tell people I feel I can move better and feel better than when I was 23 because of that. And I'll show some of these movements in my own movement courses or when I'm teaching, and I'll say, okay, here's just a fundamental one I want you to do. And I look around the room and it's astounding how many people just have zero awareness of their body parts in relationship to the world or the ability to control and stabilize themselves with these movements. And it hit me of how far I've come from doing that. And I've had, honestly, in my lower back, I've had some very severe disc herniations over my life from too many squats and doing dumb things. And if you looked at it from, I know we talked about the biomechanical aspects of pain. This is why it's going to tie back into it, where I have a really severe posterior pelvic tilt where, I have a flat back, my hips jam forward, I have a straight spine in the back, and I have a disc that virtually is non-existent and herniated it 4 times.
Okay.
And I've tried everything you can think of to improve the posture. That's more brain related than anything though. And doing all these biomechanical things. And then now I used to get pain and discomfort all the time. Now when I move and play and I'm on the ground and I'm turning and holy cow, you mean you can rotate in your lower back? You're not supposed to do that. Like, who says? you have to rotate in your lower back. I hate to tell you guys this. And then I haven't had an episode of not even an inkling or soreness in my lower back in over a decade. Nothing.
That's awesome.
And that's the only thing that I did different. And I just explore and I move and I'll get on the ground and I'll put myself into a flow state and I'll just move the way that my body wants to move. But the environment that I started to move in made a difference for me, which was going on the ground. And then here's something that really stood out to me. I mean, I used to never be able to do a pull-up. Like I could do lat rows all damn day. I mean, I could pull the weight to me. But if you got me on a bar, I couldn't pull myself up. I mean, I was muscular, but I didn't think I was really strong. And then now pop on one, I can blast out 10. And I never even tried to do pull-ups. It's just that everything kind of synchronized together for me. And I do it every day, all the time.
That's awesome. Yeah, for some reason, one thing that I wanted to mention earlier is I have this idea that the strength training industry looks at kind of the big phasic muscles,
right,
as the place to start training. But if you look developmentally, you see children don't put on heavy musculature until relatively late in their development, but they can be very strong. And it's like the most important strength then is like the hands, the feet, and the core. So it's like, for me, it seems to me that the strength should start at the periphery and at the center and then move to connect. And it's like the big power shouldn't be built until you have those, like that safety mechanism of do you grip, right? How big does your lat and your bicep and your pec need to be before you can grip well, right? And like how powerful can your quads and your hamstrings and your hips be if your feet can't do things on the ground well, right? If you don't have the ability to move the feet well, like having all that power up above that that just seems like a mechanism for injury.
Yeah, it's almost like that farmer strong. They say that, right? You never want to wrestle or play with a farmer because you'll lose every time. They've just got that strength in their hands like a freaking jackhammer, man. And it's interesting too when you think from a brain perspective. I've studied a lot of people in the world who make people strong. That's their job. And I studied a guy in Ireland named Paul McElroy. And he makes hellaciously strong people. And he said something that stuck with me. We were teaching together in London once. And the way he said it just resonated. He said, strength isn't built. It's granted to you by your nervous system.
There you go.
Which means that you'll get really, really strong if your brain will allow you to. Because this is the gatekeeper.
Yeah.
And it really ties into what you just said. Now, imagine what your brain actually thinks about allowing you to generate a ton of force from the center out. If it knows you've got the inability to control things at the ground with your foot or with whatever implement that you're holding. So then it just does this. It said, listen, I'm going to talk like your brain now. It said, listen, I'd love to give you all that core power and strength and things that you're looking for, but I can't. Because you don't have the ability to control it with your hands and your feet. And I'm just watching your back, man. I'm just trying to protect you. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to make you a little bit weaker. It's all right. It's coming. And then if you keep doing this strategy without listening to me, I'm going to send you the ultimate communication tool to get you to stop doing stupid shit. And that's the pain.
Yeah.
Pain, my definition of pain is this. Pain is a request for change.
Yeah.
And requests, I say requests from who? From you. It's your body telling you, I need you to change something. That usually will be a habit, a behavior, which is how you think and how you move, and all those different things you have to look at. And it doesn't necessarily mean go harder, faster, stronger, longer, because that's unfortunately what we tried to do. We want to force strength. And I'm not saying you can't push yourself to be stronger, but your brain's never going to allow you to push beyond a certain point if you haven't asked it nicely to grant it to you. And that's just a fundamental framework of my program these days, because I found that everything works for someone, but I found the reason that things don't work is because two reasons. One, I'm giving too many things at you at once that can work, but your brain just doesn't know what to do with it yet. Or two, I'm giving you things, but I have to shuffle them around and I have to give them to you in a very specific order for it to work well.
Yeah.
And then that's what the systems approach is, that I look at people. I can just have to flip like two things around.
Yeah.
And then that will make all the difference in the world. And it's very hard to do for people because people want a protocol for everything. And I can't give them that. I have to try to teach them the ability to learn how to think with this thought process, so you can find it for the unique human being that's in front of you. And what I like about play is that there's really no protocol for play. There is, I like what you're doing. I really like it because you have like a guideline. You need to have some rules, yeah? You need to have some rules, but within the rules,
right.
you have wiggle room.
Yep.
But you know the parameters, like your S's. I mean, that's your rules.
Yeah.
Because otherwise it'd be chaos, right?
Yep.
But you have to have something, but then you can play that has a little bit of give and take to it. But it's back to what you said before. I mean, if you break a rule, there's a repercussion for breaking a rule. That's how you learn rules.
Thanks for listening to the Evolve, Move, Play podcast. If you want to support what we're doing, make sure to like, share, subscribe, and hit that notifications button so you know what's coming up. And of course, the biggest support you can give is to become a Patreon supporter. This is what's going to allow us to grow this platform more than anything else. So this is entirely listener supported, and we really appreciate your support. And we look forward to talking to you again soon.